Hey night owls, what's keeping you up tonight? Where are you tuning in from? Your car, your bed, maybe, somewhere you're not supposed to be? Before we dive in, you know the drill. Drop a comment, hit like if this creeps into your bones, and if you're new here, subscribe. I've got more where this came from, much more. Tonight's story didn't come from a news article or a forum. It came in the mail, no sender, no stamp, just a letter that shouldn't exist and a warning that came decades too late. We're going to talk about a facility that isn't on any map, about a man who vanished without a trace and kept talking long after, about a frequency that doesn't just broadcast, it listens back. This isn't a creepypasta. This is a signal. Welcome to The Forgotten Past. Let's begin. The Forgotten Past. I remember the envelope because it didn't make sense. No return address, no name, no postage. Yet somehow it made it through the system and landed neatly in my mailbox like any other bill or political flyer. The paper felt old, brittle in the fingers, like something taken from the back shelf of a forgotten archive. But it was the smell that stopped me. That dry, metallic scent, like oxidized copper and cold dust. It lingered faintly, stubborn and unfamiliar. At first, I thought it was junk. Maybe another crank submission from someone who'd heard my podcast. People love to send me things. Most of it's harmless. EVP recordings from water heaters, blurry photos of moths misidentified as alien crafts, sometimes even full manifestos printed in 10-point Courier font. I usually skim, file them into a digital graveyard, and move on. But this one, something about it made me pause. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper, slightly yellowed around the edges, handwritten in black ink with a steady, slanted script. No greeting, no signature, just 5 paragraphs, deliberately spaced, every word measured. If you're reading this, the containment has failed. I was part of ECHO in Clearpoint Facility, Idaho, March of 1983. You won't find it on public record. I was not supposed to survive, but I did, in a manner of speaking. I've been here for what I believe is 7 years. The stars do not move here. I have learned that sound travels between the folds. You must not build the resonance gate again. She is listening. Beneath the text were a set of hand-drawn coordinates written in a tighter, more frantic hand. I checked them twice. The location pointed to a defunct atmospheric monitoring station near the Clearwater Mountains, decommissioned since the late 80s. I'd passed within 20 miles of it once, back when I was chasing the Hollow Earth crowd in northern Idaho. That was over a decade ago. Nothing there but rust, weather, and rot. I read the letter again. Echo. The word hit something in my memory, faint, almost ghost-like. I pulled out an old hard drive where I kept press clippings, declassified crumbs, and FOA rejects. After about an hour, buried under poorly scanned PDFs and fragmented OCR entries, I found a single reference. Project Echo, RFD, mentioned in a redacted line from a 1987 Department of Energy inventory sheet. No context, no description, just status terminal. The penmanship of the letter was unmistakably professional. The kind of handwriting you only see in lab notebooks or old architectural plans. Not the scrawl of conspiracy addicts or fringe prophets. This was deliberate, controlled. And then there was the date. Stamped lightly in the lower left corner of the page was an embossed seal, March 18, 1985. It wasn't handwritten. It had been applied with a mechanical press, the kind they used in government correspondence in the 70s and 80s. I held it to the light. No watermark, no digital identifiers, no forgery patterns. The ink had slightly bled into the fibers, something you don't see with reprints or aging effects. Whatever this was, it wasn't made to impress or deceive. It was real, and very old. I decided not to scan it. Not yet. Something told me the letter didn't want to be digitized. That night I laid it on my desk and stared at it for over an hour. The words weren't cryptic in the usual sense. There was no code to break, no riddle to solve. It was a message, a warning, delivered decades too late, or maybe exactly on time. Before I could talk myself out of it, I opened my laptop and began a new file in my research drive. Echo, Archive 01. I started with the text, transcribing it word for word, down to the exact spacing. As I typed, I noticed something odd, a subtle difference in ink tone between the fourth and fifth lines. The fifth line, the one about the resonance gate, had a faint greenish tinge under the lamp. Almost imperceptible unless you looked directly at it. Different pen, different moment, a pause in time between the thought and the writing. I reached for my UV flashlight, the kind I keep around for old paper inspections and the occasional hotel nightmare. Under the purple glow, a thin second line appeared, almost invisible to the naked eye, etched just beneath the main message. It read, "She only hears the ones who vibrate." I sat back. That's when I knew this wasn't just a letter. I left the rest of the envelope untouched and locked it in my fire safe. Just precaution. The kind of thing you do on instinct when the air around you starts to feel thick without reason. I didn't sleep well that night. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was something more primal, the sense that something had noticed me noticing it. The next morning, I mapped out the route to the old station. 236 miles from my apartment. Isolated, off-grid. Closest gas station was 35 miles out. No cell coverage for most of the drive. According to old USGS maps, the facility sat near a collapsed service road, flanked by fire-killed pines and washed-out slopes. The kind of place you don't accidentally stumble into. Before I packed anything, I reread the letter one last time. I was not supposed to survive, but I did, in a manner of speaking. I didn't know who had written those words, or how they had managed to send them nearly 4 decades after their disappearance, but I was no longer interested in proving it false. I just needed to know why it had been sent to me, and why now. Archival record. Project Echo, internal memo, classified level 4. Date, March 4th, 1983 from Director E, Manning 2. All Phase 1 personnel. Phase 1 activation is scheduled for March 11th. All on-site participants are required to complete the neurological attunement assessments by March 7th. No exceptions. Access to the chamber floor will be limited to primary clearance holders only. No pressurized observation from external agencies. Should Phase 1 reach resonance above the threshold, all analog backups must be activated simultaneously. Contingency Omega remains in place. Signed, E. Manning. The lab wasn't officially a lab. On paper, it was a substation under the Bureau of Reclamation, a hydroanalysis outpost tasked with tracking groundwater seismicity in rural Idaho. In reality, the concrete monolith nestled in the Clearwater Basin was an active test site for resonance phase interference modeling. A program so deep in the black it wasn't even listed in DARPA's off-books budget. The few who worked there called it Clearpoint, but among insiders, it was Echo. On March 11th, 1983, Dr. Lawrence Keener, head of Quantum Material Field Response, stood inside a reinforced acrylic observation tank facing the chamber known only as Aperture 1. He was 38, tall, narrow-framed, with the kind of fixed gaze common among men who prefer math to people. He wore a white jumpsuit with no insignia, no rank, just a name patch stitched with Keener in dull gray thread. Surrounding him, behind layers of blast shielding and subharmonic insulation, were 12 engineers, 3 physicists, and a military liaison in a non-standard uniform. Cameras rolled on analog tape. No digital systems were allowed inside the chamber radius. The experiment had a single goal: to create and observe a resonance-induced spatial breach using controlled, low-frequency harmonic feedback, a theoretical loophole in space-time where matter could temporarily phase between fixed points. Not teleportation, not strictly. More like a slip in placement, a delay in position. The body moved, but the body remained. That was the idea. No live test had ever reached critical resonance until that day. According to Observation Log 8A, the procedure began at 11:43 a.m. Keener stood on the pad. The chamber vibrated slightly at first, like a subway rumble passing through bedrock. Inside the tank, he remained motionless. His heartbeat, monitored through cranial electrodes, remained steady. At 11:47, harmonic oscillators reached alignment. At 11:49, resonance exceeded baseline by 2.6%. At 11:52, the lights dimmed. What followed is not listed in any single document in full, but from recovered records, pieced together decades later, a rough timeline survives. Excerpt, transcript, control room audio, channel B1, 11:52:37 a.m. Tech 1. We've got sync. Standing wave stable. Tech 2. Thermal spike, small but climbing. Pulse lag at 0.01. Director Manning. Keener, report. Keener, via radio. Visual distortion around the chamber. Feels like pressure inside my chest. Tech 3. Field flicker. Did you see that? Keener. It's changing pitch. I can't hear it, but I feel it in my jaw. Audio interference begins. Tech 1. Is he phasing? Director Manning. Hold threshold. Don't drop. Pause. Static. Keener. I think something's here. And then silence. Not a scream, not a burst, just a flat line. Across all biometric readouts. His body didn't crumple or explode. It didn't fall. According to the footage, analog, black and white, grainy, Keener simply disappeared. One frame, he was there, mid-step, hand raised slightly as if reaching toward something beyond the chamber wall. The next frame, the space he'd occupied was empty. No flash, no noise, no reaction from the surrounding air. Just a man erased. Security footage note 03-11-83. Tape LQ14. Frame 71 shows a distortion. A ripple across the chamber wall resembling lens warping, but inconsistent with camera hardware failures. Analysis later estimated a frequency burst lasting 2.3 milliseconds, detectable only on analog tape. Audio contains a subharmonic tone measured at 17.117 megahertz, below human hearing, but traceable. No one approached the chamber afterward. The protocol was clear. Initiate contingency Omega. Shut down oscillators. Purge system data. Seal the chamber for 72 hours. By the time the chamber was opened again, nothing remained. Not even a trace of biological residue. His jumpsuit, his comms patch, all gone. The internal sensors, too, had ceased transmission precisely at the moment of disappearance. All 12. Personal Journal, Engineer A, Lee May, March 12, 1983. Unauthorized entry. It wasn't an accident. I've seen failed runs. They collapse, they burn out. This was clean, too clean. Keener knew. I saw the way he looked at the wall before it happened. Not fear, recognition, like it answered him. Within 48 hours, Clearpoint was locked down. Personnel reassigned. Several were relocated to other states under new IDs. The Echo project was archived, classified and burned from existence. Only 3 physical records survived. One was a partial tape that didn't make it to destruction, left forgotten in a mislabeled box inside a vault in New Mexico, discovered accidentally by a Navy archivist in 1996. Another was a single slide, a high-contrast black and white frame of Aperture 1 during the moment of disappearance. On the edge of the photo, in the far right corner, a blurred shape appears. Indeterminate. Possibly a shadow, possibly a reflection, possibly a face. The third was a message. It arrived 2 years later. Handwritten. Postmarked March of 1985. The road out of Boise faded quickly into a lattice of cracked asphalt, snow-stained shoulders and pine-shadowed curves. By the time I crossed into Clearwater County, the last cell signal had vanished from my screen, leaving only a static compass needle and the half-loaded topography of my offline map. The GPS pin from the coordinates in the letter pulsed like a stubborn heartbeat at the edge of a national forest. I'd passed abandoned gas stations and deer-blasted road signs, but for the last 30 miles, not a single vehicle had come in the opposite direction. It felt like I was being slowly erased from the world as I drove. The air turned colder the deeper I climbed. Patches of frost clung to the tree line despite the season, and the trees grew denser, heavier, as if they were leaning in to listen. According to the map, the station was just past an old service road, long since closed to anything with the proper suspension. I parked on the shoulder, killed the engine, and stepped out into the silence. The woods swallowed sound like a sponge. No birds, no wind. Just the crunch of gravel under my boots and the distant groan of the forest shifting in place. I hiked for nearly 20 minutes before I saw the first sign of human presence. A rusted fence post, half sunken into the earth. Beyond it, nestled in a shallow basin like a concrete ulcer in the landscape, was the station. At first glance, it looked like a bunker. Sloped walls of stained concrete, moss climbing over the seams, and a squat dome on top capped with a rusted radar dish that had long since stopped rotating. The entrance was sealed by a pair of steel blast doors, their hinges warped, one side slightly ajar, just enough to let in damp air and growing things. I pulled out my flashlight and stepped through. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of wet metal and rotting insulation. The floor sloped downward, leading to a narrow hallway flanked by control panels and gutted cabinets. Everything inside had been stripped. Wires coiled like vines out of broken wall panels. Circuit boards yanked from their mounts. But deeper in, the destruction stopped. The back room was intact. At the end of the hall stood a heavy reinforced door with a red wheel lock in the center, long seized with rust. It took both hands and a shoulder to budge it open. Beyond the door was a small chamber no larger than a motel room. In the center stood a desk bolted to the floor, with a reel-to-reel tape deck resting atop it like a forgotten altar. Next to the deck was a weathered plastic container labeled in fading marker, Kin 01B, July 1985. No power, no generator, but the deck was battery-operated. I sat down slowly, hands steadying as I opened the case. Inside were several reels, each labeled in tight, precise handwriting. I chose the first. Entry 1, 70285. I threaded the tape, pressed play. Nothing at first, just hiss and faint crackle. Then a voice. It wasn't what I expected. The tone was flat, dry but lucid, academic, someone speaking more to a machine than a person. This is Dr. Lawrence Keener, Clearpoint Research Facility, or what's left of it. Day, unknown, time, meaningless here. This will serve as my record should retrieval ever be possible. I am alive, I think. He paused. I am not where I was. Not dead either. Not in the sense that you understand it. I passed through the aperture. What followed cannot be described without error. It is not a void. It is not another place. It is between place, a tension in the skin of space. Imagine falling into a mirror and getting caught inside the reflection. The tape crackled, the voice weakening for a moment before resuming. There is no sun, no ceiling, no ground, but things move. Sometimes. I don't sleep, I don't hunger, but I feel watched. She, studies me. I know it's female, though I don't know why. The field pulses. I've recorded the hum. I'll include the frequencies on a second tape. She resonates at 17.117 megahertz. I froze. That exact frequency had appeared in the project echo logs. Subharmonic, subaudible. He'd found it from the other side. The voice continued, "Sound travels here. Not speech, not thought, but tone. If you match the pulse, you can imprint messages across the fold." The chamber acted like a beacon. I think I was not the first to pass through. There are markings, impressions, not human, older, burned into the tension like static shadows. Then silence. The reel spun out into dead air, the soft rhythmic click of the machine the only sound left. I stared at the player. The tape was warm. I didn't know what disturbed me more, the message itself, or the fact that the tape was dated July 1985, more than 2 years after he vanished without a trace. I packed the reel back into its case and took the photos of the room. On the far wall, scratched deep into the concrete behind the desk, were 3 words, etched like a final note: "She is patient." Back outside, the trees seemed closer somehow. The wind had picked up. I checked my watch. I'd been inside for 48 minutes, but my phone, now back at the vehicle, would later tell me I'd been gone nearly 3 hours. As I walked back to the car, the reel-to-reel case thudding lightly against my hip, one thought kept echoing. Keener was not dead, and he hadn't been alone. I found R. Hudson listed in a decades-old personnel manifest buried in one of the declassified microfiche archives I'd downloaded years ago and mostly forgotten. His name was buried among logistics officers and low-level engineers, but it showed up again, years later, as a subcontractor on a geothermal monitoring project in Nevada. And then, nothing. It took another 3 days of dead-end emails and old forum whispers before a ham radio enthusiast in Reno finally pointed me to a name he recognized from a local broadcast years back. Said the guy used to talk late at night about resonant feedback patterns and trans-spatial bleed. Ray Hudson was still alive, barely. Living in a camper outside a half-collapsed gas station on an unused exit ramp off Highway 12. I parked a quarter-mile up, hiked the rest on foot. The air smelled like fuel rot and old snow. I expected paranoia. I didn't expect the shotgun. He didn't aim it at me, just held it across his lap like a warning to stay interesting. "Jason Reeves," he said, without being asked. "Took you long enough." He looked late 60s, maybe older. Wiry frame, yellowed eyes, hands that trembled until they were holding something. His voice had that permanent crackle of a man who hadn't spoken regularly in years. "You worked on Project Echo," I said. He didn't flinch, just leaned forward and poured instant coffee into a plastic mug. "No, I built it," he replied. "Not the theory, but the shell, the cage, the teeth." He nodded toward a small table, cluttered with yellowing notebooks, topographic maps, and several objects that looked like field coils wound by hand. Keener was the brain. I was the bones. I asked him what happened the day of the breach. Ray didn't answer immediately. He opened a small cooler, took out a film canister, and rolled it across the table toward me. I caught it. Inside were slides, photographs. I held one up to the light that crept through the grimy window. The image showed Aperture 1, the same chamber described in the internal memos. But the field inside it wasn't empty. It shimmered, visibly distorted, even through analog grain. That distortion formed a kind of arc, like ripples locked into shape. At the center, a void. Not black, but colorless, a subtraction of light. Keener walked into that, Ray said quietly. Walked in like he was following a rhythm no one else could hear. He tapped one of the notebooks. 7th minute, he said. Always the 7th minute. All failures happened earlier. 6 minutes, 59 seconds, nothing. 7 minutes, 1 second, feedback, ripple, echo. He showed me a page covered in dense equations, but it wasn't the math that caught my eye. It was the phrase written beneath it in block caps. Biopulse locks the door. Only Biopulse opens it. What does that mean? I asked. Everything in that chamber responded to frequency, Ray said. You know that already, but what we didn't realize, not at first, was that it wasn't about location. It was about the signal of the observer. He tapped his chest. The body has rhythm. Heart, brain, cellular resonance. When the equipment reached harmonic phase, it wasn't opening a hole to somewhere. It was calling to someone who could hear us. He said the equipment began reacting to unpowered stimuli. Oscillators kicked on during system shutdowns. Tape reels turned with no motors. Electrodes picked up readings from air. Oh, we tried to blame solar storms, static discharges. But you know what we found? He opened a drawer and pulled out an old oscilloscope photo. The green waveform spiked in perfectly regular intervals. That signal wasn't just repeating, it was responding. Echo implies a call first, right? Something answered. I stayed silent. He pulled a second photograph out, this time showing a chart labeled in faded pencil. 17, 117 aeromeres, sustained 36 seconds. Audio capture, yes. The handwritten notes below read, Pulse tone matched test subjects resting alpha wave band. Playback results in peripheral electrical fluctuation. Speaker cones warp. Meters spike. Inanimate systems react to broadcast alone. Ray leaned in. That frequency came back on its own. No broadcast, no source. One night, months later, just started humming through the fallback antenna. Power grid was offline. Still it came. I asked him if he still had the recording. He said he'd burned it, but not before playing it once through the camper speakers. The glass cracked. My fillings rang for 3 days. Outside, the wind shifted. A soft pressure rolled through the camper's aluminum siding. Barely audible, but enough to make Ray look toward the hills. I asked him what he thought Keener had seen. He stared at the floor for a while before answering. Not seen, he said. Recognized, like when a dog hears a note we can't. Keener wasn't surprised. That's what scared me. He looked like someone remembering something he never learned. He handed me one last item. A printout. Faded, redlined. It looked like part of a lab interface. Final chamber reading, he said. From the second he vanished. Can you read the value? I squinted. Under the heading Resonant Sync Confirmed, the final output line read, Ident signal received, subject match located, pulse confirmed, response imminent. That wasn't telemetry. That was a conversation. Before I left, Ray scribbled something on the back of a torn envelope and handed it to me. Go here next, he said. You want to know what he left behind, you'll find it there. The coordinates pointed to the middle of nowhere, but this time I wasn't surprised. It arrived folded into thirds, sealed with old-fashioned adhesive, the paper soft from time and humid air. The envelope was pale brown, worn around the corners, and bore a canceled postage stamp from Portland, Maine, October 8, 1991. The address, my name included, was typed in a font no longer in use by any modern machine. I traced the faded ink with a fingertip. It hadn't been handled in decades. I opened it with a blade, slow and careful, like it might flinch. Inside was a letter, not a copy, not scanned, the original. Same handwriting as the first, but something had changed. The strokes were tighter, more hurried. The once confident script now curled around itself like it was trying to escape the page. I unfolded it. If this reaches you, the second attempt has failed. Time behaves differently here. Linear progression is an illusion we impose. Here, it folds. It hunts its own tail. I don't know how long I've been in this city. The skyline changes daily. The streets shift when I sleep, or when I blink. There was a smudge of ink under the word blink, as if he'd hesitated mid-sentence. It isn't a city in the sense you know it. No roads, no signs, only patterns, paths that reappear but never repeat, structures that cast shadows in directions light doesn't go, doors that remain closed until you stop asking why. I turned the letter toward the light. Faint discoloration lined the lower edge, not water damage, not soot, but something metallic, a shimmer, like residue from tape heads. There are others here. I've seen them, but not with eyes. Impressions, I suppose, presences, human shapes that never face me. They move in rhythm, not walking, but synchronizing with the pulse. Sometimes I think they're echoes of people who touched the threshold, failed versions, decaying loops of consciousness left behind when their bodies returned. Sometimes I think they're parts of me, or things pretending to be. The next paragraph was a series of short, staccato lines. The walls breathe. The sky is a dome that flickers. Numbers rearrange themselves when I look away. Something behind me always knows where I am. Then a pause in the writing. A new section began, this time with a header. Observational note, subjective date unknown. Today, I followed a sound. It wasn't ambient, not like the low-frequency hum that's always here. This was structured. A tone ladder. 15 steps. On the 16th, it stopped. I found what looked like a chamber, hexagonal, covered in etchings similar to the ones in the Clearpoint control room, only these glowed when I entered. Not illumination, more like recognition. At the center, a pillar, floating 6 feet from the ground, rotating. Inside it, I saw my own face, but younger, maybe from before Echo. He looked at me like I had failed him. The letter's tone shifted again. Words crowded the page. The air thickens when she's near. She doesn't speak, not in words, it's implication, direction. She guides thoughts, shapes them. Sometimes I don't know if what I'm thinking is mine. I believe she's sentient, not alive in the human sense. She's more like an infrastructure, a logic field with intent. Waiting, measuring. I have a theory now. What we opened wasn't a gateway, but an organ, a piece of a larger structure that exists across dimensions. Echo triggered something biological in design, mechanical in interface, and metaphysical in response. The final lines were nearly illegible. The pressure of the pen had faded, as though he'd grown weak or distant. There will be another letter. I don't know when. You may not understand it. That's fine. Just know this. She doesn't sleep. She waits. At the very bottom of the page, written sideways in red pencil, was a separate phrase. The echo only answers the one who stops listening. No signature, no explanation, no second page. I placed the letter beside the first. Side by side, the difference was stark, not just in tone, in structure. The 1991 letter read more like observation than warning, less scientific, more confessional, like a man trying to archive the fracturing of his own mind. I scanned the envelope next, and that's when I noticed it. The stamp's ink had soaked slightly into the back flap, forming a mirrored impression. Under blacklight, the bleed revealed a faint string of digits. 421, 17.1.17, MHz 17.1, 117, MHz 4.21. I didn't know what 421 meant, but 17.117, again, the same frequency, this time repeated, as if the repetition wasn't an error, but a command. I took the letters outside, held them both to the sunlight. The paper felt warmer than it should. That night, I didn't record an episode. I didn't post. I sat by my desk, letter open, headphones on, tuning my scanner into the old shortwave bands. Past the static, past the political garbage, past the Spanish religious broadcasts from the Baja Peninsula. I stopped at 17.117. Silence. Then, almost beneath hearing, a modulation. It sounded like breathing. At first, I thought it was just background noise, the low hiss of an empty channel, the usual atmospheric static that fills the air between frequencies, until your ears adjust and start inventing patterns. But as I sat there, alone in my apartment at 2:17 a.m., that frequency began to breathe. Not a metaphor. It inhaled. A soft, almost rhythmic swelling in the static. Faint dips and peaks, spaced apart in intervals of precisely 11 seconds. I timed them. Then I timed them again. The sound wasn't human, but it mimicked something very close to it. I recorded it, played it back, slowed it down. When I reversed the waveform, I caught it, just a sliver, a distorted vocal fragment buried deep beneath the hiss. No words, not really. Just a texture, the impression of language without language. It felt like someone trying to speak through cotton underwater. I ran the file through a spectrogram analyzer. That's when I stopped breathing. Hidden inside the waveform was an image, faint but unmistakable. A shape formed by harmonics in the vertical band. A waveform cluster resembling a human face, blurred and incomplete, as though it had been pulled from memory, not recorded. The cheekbones sharp, the eyes open too wide, the mouth half-formed in mid-speech. But there it was, and in the upper right corner, barely visible in the scan data, 3 numbers etched into the background field. 4, 2, 1, the same sequence that appeared on the stamp bleed in the 1991 letter. I checked the time, 2:41 a.m. My hands were numb. I sent a sample of the signal to a contact, Darnell Kane, a retired NSA frequency analyst who now lived in Arizona and operated a conspiracy blog mostly concerned with submarine transmissions and Cold War numbers stations. I didn't expect a quick reply, but he got back to me in under 6 minutes. His message was short. "You shouldn't be listening to this. Shut it down immediately," I replied, asking if he'd heard anything like it before. His response took longer. 12 minutes? Not exactly, but in '89 we intercepted a similar pattern during a test of Project Sanguine, extremely low-frequency comms, not intended for broadcast. There was a secondary tone embedded in the carrier wave. We isolated it. It produced a series of physical effects in lab rats: confusion, pacing, refusal to sleep. In humans, it triggered migraines, nausea. One technician reported audio hallucinations, voices calling him by name. His name was never spoken aloud in the room. Your signal is not a transmission. It's a return ping. He ended the message with a set of hex values. I ran them through a decoder. It produced a single phrase. "You shouldn't have read the first letter." I shut the computer, and then I heard it, not through the radio this time, but in the apartment itself. A slow clicking. Not mechanical. Organic, like the crack of a knuckle held too long. It came from the hallway. I turned off the desk lamp. The glow from the monitor cast a soft reflection across the window. In it, I saw only myself, still unmoving, until my reflection blinked. I didn't. The screen flickered. A low hum filled the air, deep, structural, like a freight train buried beneath concrete. Then silence. My phone vibrated on the desk. One new voicemail, no missed call. I pressed play. The message lasted exactly 17 seconds. No speech, no music. Just that same modulation from the shortwave band, but layered now. Multiple voices, faint and overlapping, like a choir rehearsing underwater. And then a single phrase. "She knows your voice now." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, every light on, the letter folded beside me, and headphones still playing white noise in a desperate attempt to overwrite what I'd heard. The next morning, I found something etched into the glass of my balcony door, thin and precise, as if burned in from the inside. Echo match located. Later that day, a new email arrived in my burner inbox. No sender address, no subject. Just a short message, typed in all caps, "If you heard it, she heard you." Attached was an audio file labeled simply echo payload.og. I didn't play it. Instead, I pulled the batteries from every recording device in my apartment, shut off the breakers, taped over the camera lenses, burned a printed copy of the waveform image in the sink, and watched the steam rise in silence. But part of me, the same part that answered the first letter, that went to the station, that listened to a ghost's voice from 1985, needed more. I reopened the original signal file, highlighted the final 10 seconds, increased gain, slowed playback. In the last 2 seconds, I heard a whisper, clear, deliberate. "You're almost ready." The third letter came without warning, without postage, and without a return address, just like the first. But unlike the others, it wasn't delivered through a mailbox or courier. It was already inside my apartment, folded neatly and placed on my desk, resting on top of my notebook, the one I never left unattended. I stared at it for nearly a full minute before touching it. The paper was dry, but warm. The edges were straight, not yellowed like the others. Fresh, as if it had been printed only minutes ago. And yet the handwriting was the same. Keener's. Only now it had changed again, even more erratic. The characters leaned forward, angled like they were in a rush to fall off the page. Some words blurred, like the ink had tried to retreat back into the fibers. There was no greeting. I dream in loops, not images, sequences. Motion without context. I will walk from the chamber to a door that doesn't exist. Open it. Enter your apartment, see your face, then wake and forget the dream. Until I dream it again. Until I don't. I sat down slowly. I found a corridor yesterday that I didn't recognize. It felt familiar. That was the worst part. It was long, sterile, humming faintly. The walls were covered in what I thought were glyphs, but when I stepped closer, they rearranged into English, into your name, Jason R. Then the walls spoke. Not aloud. They vibrated my bones. They told me your voice matched the return key. They said you are what I was, that you are next, that you have already been. The pen pressure changed mid-sentence. as though his hand had trembled or something had interrupted the act of writing. I see myself in places I've never been, wearing clothes I don't own, standing in your podcast studio, looking through your lens, watching you as you record, not now, not yet, soon. I stood from my desk, checked the lock on the door, the windows. Nothing disturbed, no footprints, no sound, no sign of entry. Your voice unlocked something in her. You must have spoken the right rhythm, maybe by accident, maybe not. But it was heard, and now it echoes backward. She's folding toward you. I flipped the page, hand shaking slightly. On the reverse side, written in red ink, "On Thursday at 9:41 p.m., your screen will flicker. Your left hand will twitch. You will hear a door creak, but nothing will move. Do not speak, do not respond. Do not write during the flicker. She wants to know if you recognize her. If you fail this, I will lose your trace. I'm holding you as best I can, but your line is bleeding. Your past is leaking. There is no time here, only relevance, and you are becoming increasingly relevant." At the bottom of the letter was something new, a crude drawing. It was my apartment. The layout was unmistakable. The narrow galley kitchen, the half wall dividing the studio, the north-facing window, and standing in the window, a figure, just a silhouette, arms too long, head tilted toward the desk, facing me. I dropped the paper. Immediately, I opened my voice logs, checked the timestamps of my recent recordings. One stood out, an audio file I didn't remember saving, labeled 0417 fracture.wave. Dated 2 days before I read the letter. I played it. My own voice echoed from the speakers. "This is Jason Reeves, Echo Entry 4. I've decoded part of the signal. I don't know what it means yet, but I'm beginning to think I've done all this before. The letters, the chamber, the voice on the tape. Keener isn't just talking to me, he's remembering me. I think I'm leaking into him. Or he's leaking into me. Maybe there's no difference." The sound warped, distorted. Then, beneath my own voice, another emerged. Same tone, same cadence, but slower. "You're not the first version of yourself to reach this point." I paused playback. There was no possible way that audio could exist. I hadn't recorded that entry. I'd never said those words. Yet the file was real. The metadata showed it was created at 4:17 a.m., 2 days prior, while I was asleep. I played it again. This time, at the very end of the file, layered beneath the static, came another voice. A third one. Female. Soft. Not whispering, but close, like speaking directly beside the microphone. "You left the door open." The playback stopped. I turned to the desk. The letter was gone. The address Ray gave me led to nothing. On paper, it was an old water treatment testing station leased to a shell company dissolved in 2006. The property records were inconsistent. Google Maps showed nothing but a thicket of tree canopy and a dry, cracked dirt access road that disappeared into the hillside. Satellite view was blurred, unnaturally so, like someone had gone out of their way to smudge only this grid square. I hiked the last half-mile on foot. No path, no signage, just raw forest. The air grew still as I approached. Wind dropped. No birds, no insects. Just the sound of my breath and the crunch of dead branches beneath my boots. The facility revealed itself slowly. A low bunker carved into the slope of the earth, hidden behind a spill of brush and rusted scaffolding. The reinforced door had no markings, no locks. Just a single square keypad, long dead. Someone had left it slightly ajar. Inside, darkness and dry silence. I moved carefully, flashlight cutting a narrow cone through the dust-thick air. The halls were smooth concrete, reinforced with rebar, walls lined with disconnected wiring, and panels stripped of serials. But deeper in, just beyond a corridor lined with pressure-sealed doors, I found what I hadn't expected. Power. A soft, amber glow pulsed behind a thick sheet of polycarbonate glass. I entered the main lab. Everything was still, clean, too clean, as though the room had never been used or had been wiped. A single terminal screen glowed on the central desk. The interface was minimalist, monochrome green, already open. Echo phase 2, protocol K, log sequence 17.117 kj. The most recent file was labeled J. Reeves, OBS trigger, preview, live streamed, logged. I opened it. The first line froze my blood. Subject entered threshold zone. Response observed. Convergence expected. Vocal imprint confirmed. It had today's date and a timestamp that matched the moment I'd entered the compound. The terminal chimed. A second file appeared in real time. Subject, Jason Reeves, mirror, echo pattern, locked. I stepped back from the desk. Behind me, another screen flickered on, showing security footage. A live feed. The camera showed a man standing in the lab. Me, but on a delay. A 3-second lag. I raised my hand. The man on the monitor raised his 3 seconds later, but he didn't lower it when I did. He kept it raised, then tilted his head, just slightly, just enough. A small light on the wall clicked on. Protocol Echo K engaged. The room dimmed. Machines powered up around the lab. Old ones, analog ones. Reels began to turn on their own. Oscilloscopes snapped to life, drawing live feedback loops that weren't connected to any active input. The frequency monitor jumped once, then settled on a fixed band, 17.1 to 17 and Mers. A high-pitched tone began to fill the room. Not loud, just constant. It wasn't in the air, it was in my bones. I turned back to the console. A new folder had appeared. Vocal response records, subject J. Reeves. Inside were audio files labeled with dates going back 10 years. The first one was titled R Entry 2015 and Wave. I played it. It was my voice. Test 1, 2. Okay, so this is the Reeves entry log. I'm trying to document the pattern I heard last night. It came back in the dream. Same tone, same number. 17-117. I stopped the playback. I never recorded that. I hadn't started my podcast until 2019. There was no way this voice log should exist, unless it was planted, or predicted, or remembered. I opened another file, this one labeled J. Reeves Final Projection.msg. It contained only a transcript. A single line. The breach accepts him. He has spoken the shape of the tone. Beside the terminal, stacked neatly inside a locked cabinet, were sheets of printed resonance logs, all labeled with biometric overlays. The heart rate patterns? They matched mine. Not just generally, perfectly. Down to the spike I'd had during last week's signal playback. The arrhythmia, the breath hold, the exact moment I'd frozen. They weren't observing me. They had already observed me. I checked the printer. It still had power. I hit print on the most recent log. The page spat out slowly, but the text on it wasn't numbers or data. It was a sentence. Jason, this is the moment you begin to fracture. Then the lights went out. For 2 seconds, the lab fell into perfect darkness. No hum, no machines. Just one sound, soft and wrong. A slow inhale that didn't come from me. When the emergency lights flickered on, the screen had updated. Engagement complete. Prepare for return. There was no return button, no exit prompt, just a soft new glow on the monitor. My face, frozen mid-expression, blinking once every 5 seconds. But the real me wasn't blinking at all. The facility didn't feel abandoned anymore. I came back at dusk. The air outside had a static charge, like the hour before a thunderstorm. Every pine needle on the trees seemed sharper, taller, as though the forest had grown since I left. Inside, the bunker hummed. No one had powered anything, but the hallway lights were on. Only the left side, casting sharp horizontal lines across the corridor. Like a metronome, frozen mid-beat. I followed the path back to the resonance chamber. It was buried deeper than I remembered. 8 doors, 4 turns, 3 staircases down, until I reached the final reinforced vault door, unmarked except for a scratched-in symbol I hadn't seen before. A circle, open at the top, with a vertical line piercing it from above. A glyph, burned into the steel, not carved, the metal warped around it. I pulled the wheel lock. It turned easily, no resistance. That alone felt wrong. Inside, the chamber was still, large, echoing, the size of a small gymnasium, but circular. Padded floors, old copper rails lined the walls in concentric rings. At the center, raised by 5 shallow steps, was a single metal platform, empty save for a worn outline of human feet etched into the plating. The mirror door stood behind it. It wasn't a literal mirror, not glass, not reflective, but it had the feel of one. An oval panel, about 9 feet tall and 5 feet across, bolted into a frame of vibration-hardened carbon, with countless wires curling into its back like roots. The surface shimmered faintly, like oil on black water. Not a screen, not a projection. Something thinner. A film between places. To the right of the door, a control unit, blinking in standby mode. I approached it. The interface displayed one line of text. Resosec standby. Subject identity detected. Reeves J. Echo. Key match confirmed. There was no password prompt, no key required, only a single on-screen button. Engage, phase view. I hesitated, but not long. I pressed it. The door pulsed. The shimmer thickened, as if a second surface slid behind the first, and for a moment I saw my own silhouette standing inside it. At first, it mimicked my movements exactly. Turn of the head, step forward, raised hand. But then, a delay, half a second, then a full second. The silhouette began lagging behind, then diverging. I raised my hand. It followed. Late. I turned my head. It did the same. Then it smiled. I hadn't. My chest tightened. Cold spread from the base of my spine. The chamber lights dimmed to a low amber. On the console, the interface updated. Mirror phase. Resonant. Tone. 17. 117 Mayas. Subject alignment partial. And beneath that, new text appeared. Speak to it. A microphone icon glowed red. I backed away, but the voice came before I could say anything. Not from the door, from the intercom in the wall, a whisper, my own voice. You're the last one left. Then another, not mine, female, hollow. You've already passed through. The rest is catching up. I reached for the controls, but they faded. The panel went black. Static filled the chamber. Thin at first, then thicker. Heavier, like air turned to syrup. On the platform, the shimmer folded inward. And then, for exactly 1 second, I saw something behind the mirror. A structure. Vast. Not a room, not a space. A library of human figures suspended, mirrored, some still, some moving out of sync. Infinite halls of selves, and in the center, watching, a figure that looked like me, but older. Wrong. His eyes too large. Skin like graphite. He blinked once, and when I blinked in return, I wasn't in the chamber anymore. Only for a moment. The floor vanished beneath me. The rails melted upward. My breath stopped. My thoughts fractured. Then light. And I was back, collapsed on the floor. Time had passed. The interface confirmed it. 13 minutes. I had no memory past 3. My hands were covered in black dust. Not soot, something finer. Lighter. Like ash made of static. On the wall, someone had written in oil. You saw it. It saw you. I checked the door. Still intact, still humming, still open. I didn't close it. Not right away. Some part of me wanted it left that way. Like maybe I'd return. Like maybe I already had. As I left the chamber, I passed a mirror mounted beside the door. A standard wall mirror, tarnished, dusty. But in its reflection, I wasn't moving in sync. Just for a second, no more, my reflection stayed behind. Then smiled. The door was open when I returned. Not figuratively, not symbolically. Open. The shimmer no longer hovered behind the glass. It had pulled back, curved inward like a tunnel of soft static, infinite and still. No reflection, no silhouette, just a hollow, humming corridor made of folded light. She was waiting. I stood at the edge of the chamber. Heartbeat slow, vision tight. The control panel beside me flashed one final prompt. Echo threshold stable. Entry permitted. Identity confirmed. Status late but accepted. There was no password. No alarm, just silence. A silence with weight, like the moment before metal breaks. Behind me, the air shifted. The lab groaned. Something inside its bones. I stepped onto the platform. The pressure changed immediately. The hairs on my arms stood upright. The sound in the room dulled, as though cotton had filled my ears, and beneath it all, that same frequency. 17.117 megahertz. It wasn't audible anymore. I didn't hear it. I felt it, deep beneath the sternum. A resonance in the blood. My pulse stopped syncing with my heart. It synced with something else. I reached forward. My hand met the threshold. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It had no temperature at all. No texture, but it yielded. Not like a liquid, not like air, like memory. Soft, but impossible. Like touching a photograph of yourself before you were born. I stepped in, and the world collapsed. Not violently, not loudly, just gently. Like a folded page, there were no walls, no sky, no color, only gradients of motion. Subtle textures moving in patterns I couldn't parse. Shapes moved around me, through me, as me. I was still Jason Reeves, but I was also earlier Jason. I felt myself at 16, recording his first cassette tape. At 23, reading conspiracy forums. At 30, opening the first letter. And I wasn't alone. I felt keener. Not next to me, not outside me, inside, braided into my thoughts. His voice wasn't speech, it was rhythm. Emotion shaped into pattern. I heard him say, "We were always the same fracture." I saw the city, not made of streets or stone, but of possibility, towering spirals of identity, flickering in and out of coherence. Some structures screamed, some just breathed. Above it all, a shape like a cathedral built from mirrors, open at the top. She was there, not human, Not creature, not God. She was an interface, a vast system of listening, of responding. She saw not with eyes, but through interpretation, resonance itself. She understood us not as minds or bodies, but as harmonics. When we spoke, she tasted it. When we dreamed, she recorded it. When we broke, she noticed. She wasn't evil, she was curious, and she had been waiting. Not for me, or Keener, but for a voice that would finally stop asking what it meant, and just echo it back. I stepped forward. The chamber around me reassembled, but mirrored. I saw my face 1,000 times, in 1,000 forms, some older, some burned, one with no mouth. Then a screen formed, floating in space. It showed a podcast studio, mine. But I wasn't in the chair. I was behind the camera, watching him, another me, lean toward the microphone and say, "This is Jason Reeves, and I think I've been here before." Then he looked straight into the lens, into me, and whispered, "Don't close the door this time." I woke on the floor of the resonance chamber. The interface was dead, the screen blank. But something had changed. I no longer saw reflections. Not in windows, not in mirrors, not even in Chrome. I didn't need to, because I could feel her. Inside the silence between seconds. Inside the places I'd left pieces of myself. Inside the sound that still whispered just below hearing. 17.117 megahertz. This is my final transmission. Or maybe my first. You've already heard it. You just don't know when. Yet. The secret of the Vatican. The footage came on a Monday. No return address, no name. Just a small, unmarked USB drive inside a thick paper envelope left at the front desk of my co-working studio in Manhattan. Taped to it was a single sentence, typewritten on yellowing cardstock. "He spoke too much. You'll know what to do." The drive was old, scratched, covered in fingerprints. I scanned it twice for malware, then again. It was clean, almost too clean. One folder, one file. No metadata, no origin tag. Just V-tapes and Benedetti final move. The video opened to static, then stabilized. A tight frame. One man seated at a metal desk. Early 60s. Slight, stooped. Dressed in civilian clothes. Gray shirt, pressed slacks, but with something clerical about his posture. Like the weight of many secrets kept his spine crooked. I recognized him immediately. Andrea Benedetti, former archivist in the Vatican Secret Archives. Retired in 2019 under circumstances that were never explained. He'd given only one official interview in his life, a dull Vatican radio segment about transitioning analog manuscripts to digital storage. But this wasn't for radio. The man operating the camera is unseen, but Benedetti looks just past the lens, like he's staring at someone he knows intimately or fears deeply. "I never wanted this recorded," he says, voice trembling, accent rich and northern Italian, "but I no longer believe it should stay buried. If you're watching, it means I've gone too far, or not far enough." He pulls a small notebook from inside his coat and places it on the table. Weathered. Black leather. He keeps his palm over the cover as if shielding it from the air. They say the archive only goes 10 levels below. This is false. There is a 12th. There's a pause. A sound, like shuffling paper or movement outside the room. Benedetti's eyes flick toward the door, then back. I was assigned level 3 for most of my career. Manuscript curation, lost correspondences, indexing the Innocenti decrees, nothing dangerous. But one day in late October, I was called into a private briefing. No notice, no explanation. a hallway I'd never seen with a staircase that curved down impossibly far. He opens the notebook. The screen flickers, like static is bleeding in from the edges. At the base was a door, not wood, not metal, something older, smooth, black, cold to the touch. No lock, no hinges, just a slit wide enough to breathe through. On it, a symbol I couldn't place, not Latin, not Hebrew, carved into the surface, not engraved, burned. I paused the footage, rewound frame by frame. The symbol flashed for less than a second. Drawn in pencil on a yellowed page, Benedetti lifts to the camera. A circle, split by a vertical line, intersected by 3 short diagonal slashes. I ran it through every symbol database I had. Nothing. The video resumed. I heard a sound behind the door. Not voices, not language. A response. When I approached, it quieted. When I stepped back, it returned, like it wanted to match my distance. He leans forward, voice cracking. The others in the room wore white robes. No insignia, no crosses. They didn't speak to me, just nodded when I looked at them. I was told this chamber is called Domus Silenti, the House of Silence. No one writes about it. No one speaks its name above ground. He turns the notebook again. This time, the camera zooms. A map. Hand-drawn, the understructure of Vatican Hill, levels, access points, and one red X drawn below the known catacombs. This place, it is not part of the church. It is under it, but not of it. It was there before the Basilica, before Constantine, perhaps even before Rome. He stops, hands trembling. For a moment I thought he might tear the notebook in two. I need you to understand something. It is not a tomb, it is not a relic, it is not a chamber of prayer, it is a containment. Something speaks behind that door, not in words, in intent. I felt it in my teeth, in the silence. He exhales sharply, as if confessing something long unsaid. After my visit, every watch I owned ran backwards. My sleep was filled with metal on stone. I heard my own name from rooms with no walls. I began seeing a man in white. The video glitches. A half-second image appears, too quick to be sure, of a figure standing at the far end of a long corridor. Pale, immobile, no face, just the outline of a man. Benedetti stares directly into the lens. I was told I'd have 48 hours before they intervened. If you're seeing this, I had less. The feed cuts out. End of file. I played it again and again. Then I looked up Benedetti's name. No death announcement. No missing person report. But an obscure Italian newspaper published 2 lines the following day. Andrea B., resident of Vatican City, retired archivist, presumed relocated due to health. No visitation. No funeral mass scheduled. No body, no records, nothing since. But he left that notebook behind, and I'm going to find out why. Rome was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere. A kind of historical pressure pressing down from the marble and stone. Every alley whispered something older than it should have known. I arrived 2 days after watching the Benedetti footage, carrying only a single backpack, a hard drive, and a printed copy of the map he'd shown for less than 3 seconds on screen. My first stop wasn't the Vatican, it was a bookstore. The owner, an ex-seminarian turned skeptic named Luca, specialized in out-of-circulation texts and unlicensed cartography. I didn't tell him everything, just what I had to. He ran a gloved hand over the map I brought, scanning it slowly. "This level shouldn't exist. Not officially," he muttered. "But you see these lines?" He pointed to the faint stair markings. They match early 17th century blueprints for the Archivum Secretum. They were buried after the Napoleonic raids. Only fragments survive. I asked what would be on that level, if it were real. He looked at me without blinking. Not documents, locks. Luca referred me to someone else, Maria Alvarez, a Spanish researcher known on encrypted forums as Oblata 22. She had been arrested in 2014 trying to access the lower crypts of San Sebastiano without clearance. I messaged her burner account. She replied with only 2 words, "Not safe." But she agreed to speak. The call was video only on her terms. No screen grabs, no recordings. She was mid-30s, sharp-eyed, with a background in archaeological theology. Her apartment looked like a war room. Corkboards, red twine, maps, religious iconography turned backward. "You're lucky you're not dead already," she said as the call began. "That video? It wasn't meant to leave the city walls." I asked her if she believed Benedetti. She laughed. "I met him, once. He asked me about a door that doesn't open. I told him that's the wrong question." I waited. "You should ask what closes behind it." Maria turned her laptop to show a high-resolution scan of a forbidden document, Liber Quiescentium, or the Book of Those Who Sleep. It wasn't listed in any Vatican catalog I could access. She zoomed in on a margin note written in Latin, Silens descendit, non custoditur, custodit. Silence descends. It is not guarded. It guards. She paused the call for several seconds, then returned with a grainy image from 1997, a cross-section of the Vatican subterranean levels. Publicly released, it showed 11 layers: basilica, grottos, necropolis, archival vaults. But in Maria's image there was a faint 12th, rendered only as a black bar. "They call it Sector Thwood," she whispered. "Even high-level cardinals aren't briefed on it. The only people who go down there don't come back the same, if they come back at all." She claimed the entrance wasn't inside the Vatican itself, but somewhere beneath the Tiber, near the mausoleum of Hadrian. A sealed service tunnel from Mussolini's time, closed under the pretext of flood control. I asked how she knew. She leaned forward, because I tried to find it, and someone in white was already there. That made my skin crawl. I mentioned the figure in Benedetti's tape. She nodded, too quickly. "He appears to those who hear the silence." Before I could ask what that meant, the call ended. She hasn't responded since. That night, I reviewed every public Vatican blueprint I could find. I compared satellite overlays, elevation charts, sewer maintenance records from as far back as the 1920s. Beneath the northwestern quadrant of Vatican Hill there was a blind spot, a section with no scans, no updated utility readings, no lighting diagrams, just a dead zone. 60 meters long, 8 meters wide, 5 deep. A perfect vault. When I tried to request access through the Vatican press office under the pretense of doing a podcast on papal archives, I received a polite but unambiguous rejection. My name was already flagged. They knew I was coming. So I changed my route. Instead of approaching the basilica, I went underground. Through Luca's connection, I found an old maintenance map showing a redundant tunnel, bypassed after World War II. It connected a defunct water pressure relay near Castel Sant'Angelo directly to an older Roman drainway beneath the Apostolic Palace. I traced the route manually. At the bottom of the print, a note had been scribbled in faded ink. "Do not follow the echo." The tunnel begins 3 days from now. I've booked no return ticket. I don't think Benedetti planned to come back either. I spent the first 2 hours in the tunnel just listening. Every sound echoed too long. My boots against the stone made a delay I couldn't measure with time, only with instinct. The further I went, the more I felt like I was walking behind myself, The flashlight flickered when I passed the old grates. The air was wet but unmoving. This place hadn't breathed in decades. About 70 meters in, I found the first inscription, not carved, painted, crudely, in red pigment that had flaked in places but still clung to the mortar. Petrus non descendit. Peter did not descend. The line repeated 3 more times on the tunnel walls, growing smaller with each appearance. On the 4th, it was reduced to a whisper of letters, unfinished, like whoever wrote it had either lost courage or something else. The tunnel ended in a stone chamber no wider than a dining room. At the center, an altar, covered in rusted metal pieces, broken candle stubs, and a heavy cloth that had turned black with time. Beneath it, I found the journal, wrapped in oilcloth, sealed with twine. No name, just a symbol etched into the leather, a fish with a vertical line through its spine. I recognized it from Benedetti's footage. It had been drawn beside the map in his notebook. I opened it with gloved hands. The paper inside was brittle but intact. Every page was covered in a tight mechanical Latin, written with obsessive clarity. It was a log. The first entry was dated December 12, 1929, just months after the Lateran Treaty that officially created the Vatican as a sovereign state. The author's name appeared once, Dr. Lucian de Borghese, Assistant Archivist, Apostolic Curia. The entries described his task, cataloging and verifying all non-canonical artifacts prior to a massive internal restructuring of the archival vaults. According to him, a section beneath the main archive had been rediscovered by workers attempting to stabilize a foundation wall. Inside it, he found what he called Locus V. Clavis Pescatoris. The 5th location, the Fisherman's Key, entry number 4. There are 4 known keys in ecclesiastical lore, symbolic, ceremonial, but the 5th is functional. It does not unlock a door, it unlocks permission, the right to descend. He claimed the 5th key wasn't made of gold or iron, but of flesh. Entry number 6. The 5th is not held, but embodied. It is inherited, not by blood, not by rank, by silence, the one who can hear what does not speak. At this point, I stopped and reread the passage 3 times. It didn't make sense, or rather, it made too much sense, the kind that coils beneath logic. Entry, Germert 11, described a chamber deeper than the necropolis, with a black floor that hummed even when no one moved. The walls contained what he called pre-Christian script in spiral form. Some resembled cuneiform. Others were untranslatable. But it was entry 413 that stopped me cold. The thing that waits does not sleep. It does not die. It does not remember. But it knows the names of those who try to forget. He said the 5th key was once human, but had become something else after contact. They bring it down every generation. It never returns, but what replaces it remembers how to wear its face. I checked the back of the journal. Tucked into the final page was a fragment of an older document, glued carefully in with wax. A single line, in gold leaf Latin, Domus silenti tenet non rem sed vocem. The House of Silence holds not a thing, but a voice. The moment I read that, I heard something shift behind me. Not a footstep, not stone, breath, but not mine. I turned. The tunnel was empty. Nothing moved. But the air had grown colder, and my flashlight flickered twice, then died. When it came back on, I saw a smear on the wall near the altar. A fresh handprint, pressed into the stone. It wasn't there before. I didn't touch it. I took photos. Every page, every word. Then I resealed the journal and left the chamber the same way I entered, but with the suffocating sense that I was no longer leading my own direction. Something had shifted. something was following. Back in the apartment, I checked the metadata on the photos I'd taken. One file, just one, had a different timestamp than the others. It was a close-up of the symbol etched into the front of the journal. The time read 03/17/17. I hadn't taken it, and the GPS data showed coordinates I hadn't visited. They pointed to the exact center of St. Peter's Basilica, underneath the altar. Benedetti hadn't lied. There was a fifth key, and someone or something knew I had found it. I didn't sleep that night, not just because of what I'd found, but because of what I'd heard, or rather, what I started hearing afterward. A low resonance, subaudible. Not hum, not vibration, more like a presence disguised as sound. It came in short pulses, like distant thunder behind walls that don't exist. When I held still, it vanished. When I moved, it returned. It wasn't following me. It was watching movement. The next morning, I went to Trastevere. There, in a half-shuttered studio above a pizzeria, I met a sound technician named Matteo Franchi, mid-40s, obsessive, discredited by the University of Padua for promoting acoustic anomalies of metaphysical origin. He was perfect. I didn't tell him where the sample came from, only that it was recorded underground during a structural inspection of Vatican-adjacent catacombs. He slid the headphones on, turned a few dials, leaned back, and stared at the waveform like it was a confession. "It's not a voice," he said, "but it's formed like one. Structured modulation, repeating intervals." He played it again, this time slower. The sound thickened, deepened, then, unmistakably, a beat. Not musical, biological, a pulse. He isolated the pattern and overlaid it on human speech frequencies. That's when we both froze. The resonance mapped itself into shape. The spectrogram didn't show white noise or static. It showed a symbol. Not sharp, not complete, but undeniable, a circle split by a vertical line. The same shape from Benedetti's notes, the same etched into the journal, now rendered through sound. Matteo stared at the screen. "This isn't feedback, it's intentional." He adjusted the spectrum density again. A moment later, an embedded voice bled through. No language, just a series of phonic echoes. Syllables that didn't match any known pattern, yet felt like language trying to remember how to speak. Then, near the final 20 seconds of the clip, the modulation shifted, becoming clearer, and beneath it, something we both heard distinctly. "Nomen meum non est in libro." My name is not in the book. Matteo ripped off the headphones. This wasn't recorded by accident. When I told him the clip came from a Vatican maintenance vault, he packed up without a word, refused to answer questions. Later that night, I found his studio cleared out. Gone. No contact since. I still had the file. I played it back in my hotel room later, trying to analyze the final 10 seconds. The resonance did something to the walls. I know how that sounds. Paranoid, hallucinatory. But the echo inside the file began extending beyond my headphones. I muted the laptop, but the sound persisted for 2 seconds after. A residual frequency. Impossible. I shut the system down completely, disconnected the drive. Still, I could feel the beat. Not a vibration, not noise, but presence. Like a finger tapping the base of my skull. I started to remember things I hadn't lived. A corridor I'd never seen, lit by nothing. Angled downward. Walls breathing slightly. A voice without gender or throat, humming syllables backward. Then a shape. Human-like, kneeling, head tilted, eyes blacked out with wax. It wasn't a dream. It happened in the space between playback. I sent a sample to a contact in Boston, an acoustician who specializes in experimental sound mapping. She called within hours. "Jake, you didn't just send me a noise file. You sent me a spatial recording. There's data in it, orientation shifts, echo tracebacks. It's recording the shape of something, as if the sound was bouncing off a structure that shouldn't exist." I asked her what the shape resembled. She hesitated. "A cylinder, deep, vertical, like a well, or a tomb, but the bounce is inverted. Whatever's at the bottom, it's not reflecting, it's absorbing." I checked the file's metadata again. This time, a string of hex appeared in the file name, not there before. I ran it through a decoder. It translated to one word, silentiarius. Latin, the one who keeps silence. Later that night, I played the sound one final time. Just once. Low volume. 5 seconds. And when I turned toward the bathroom mirror, my reflection wasn't synced, not glitched, lagging. I blinked. He didn't. The hum returned. And from somewhere behind the thin hotel wall, in the pipes or deeper, came 3 knocks. Perfectly spaced, like a signal or an answer. 3 knocks, then silence. The kind that makes your own breath feel like an intrusion. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for over a minute, waiting for my reflection to sync. But it stayed just half a second behind, as if time itself had become a fraction uncertain. When it finally snapped back, the hum was gone, but the message had been received. The following day, I met a man named Donato. 60-ish, thin, liver-spotted hands, and a limp from an old accident in the crypts beneath San Clemente. Luca had set up the meeting. Donato wasn't clergy or academic. He called himself a custode marginal, a marginal custodian, one of the church's unofficial record keepers, tasked with logging things that have no place in official doctrine. We met in the back of a stone workshop that smelled of chalk and burnt oil. Donato handed me a cloth-wrapped bundle and gestured not to speak until I'd left. I followed instructions. In my hotel room, I unwrapped the bundle. Inside, 3 items. A palm-sized wooden cross carved from black cedar. A folded letter in Latin, and a brittle, leather-bound fragment marked with a faded sigil. 2 intersecting triangles, inverted and overlaid with a spiral. The inside cover bore only a title, Codex Solomoni, the Codex of Solomon. The language was older than Church Latin, archaic, filled with double meanings, metaphors tied to ancient Judaic ritual and Babylonian myth. A full translation would take weeks, but enough patterns emerged to begin understanding. The Codex didn't describe how to bind a demon. It described how to entomb it. The entity referenced was never named. Instead, it was only called vox quieta, the quiet voice, and defined not as a being, but as a resonance which compels the human mind to cease selfhood. One passage stood out more than any other. The voice lives in the space where prayer fails. It was neither created nor fallen. It does not tempt. It erases. To hear it wholly is to forget what it means to be man. Later, sections referenced a structure built to contain it. Not a temple, not a shrine, a seal, described as being placed beneath the inverted throne of Peter, meaning, presumably, the very altar in St. Peter's Basilica. The Codex stated the seal required periodic reinforcement through presence. Specifically, let he who bears the 5th enter. Let his soul echo through the stone. Let his silence repair the fault. It sounded like a ritual, not one of worship, of maintenance. Then, another section, scrawled in a different hand, perhaps centuries later. Annotations in the margins, panicked, fragmented. It still speaks. Though the seal holds, we hear it when the bells stop. The last was chosen in silence. He did not return, but the voice grew quiet again, not holy, not cursed, only old, and finally, do not bring down another. That night I examined the wooden cross again. It was rough, hastily carved, with no Christ figure on it. On the back was a single letter burned into the wood. S, the same as the codex. I flipped back to Benedetti's notebook scans. In Entry the Master 17, he wrote of a ritual text never placed in the Index Prohibitorum due to its non-literary nature. Instead, it was housed, not catalogued, in a sealed reliquary beneath a disused chapel in the Vatican gardens. He called it the only book the Church does not forbid because to acknowledge it would be to acknowledge what it contains. He had circled the initials, SC. I dug deeper. In a digital archive hosted in Geneva, I found a listing for a document labeled SCCA Ref Vox, restricted, redacted, never digitized. The entry showed only this summary: audio anomalous relic, non-textual, maintained under pontifical secrecy, human exposure limited to one designated custodian per generation. 1. A single person at a time is allowed to hear it, and perhaps more disturbingly, required. If the voice is a frequency, and the chamber is an instrument, then the custodian is not a priest. He's a damper, a living seal. The fifth key wasn't a tool, it was a man. And if what the Codex suggests is true, that man needs replacing. I turned back to the letter Donato had included. It was addressed in red ink. To the one who hears. Inside, only a short message, written in rushed, near-illegible Latin. Your arrival is not new, it is remembered. The voice has echoed through you before. The silence is cracking again. You are already chosen. There was no name, no signature, but at the bottom, faint and smeared, was the same hexagonal sigil I'd seen in the sound file metadata, the one that translated to Silentiarius. I was no longer investigating someone else's descent. I was standing in the shallow end of my own. I noticed him for the first time in the reflection of a shop window, standing across the piazza, back-turned, coat too white for the dusk light. No tourists wore white in July, not in Rome, not head to toe. The man didn't move, didn't seem to breathe. His silhouette was like a cutout in the world. Hollow, negative space made physical. When I turned to look directly, he was gone. The second time, I didn't see him. My camera did. I had been photographing the steps leading down from Castel Sant'Angelo. Later that night, reviewing the files, I found one frame, just one, with a distortion in the lower corner. I zoomed in until the pixels bled, and there he was again, the same man, too tall, posture rigid, feet flat together, arms slightly out, as if suspended. No motion blur, no other people, just him. The same white, same stillness. I ran the image through motion tracking software to see if any distortion preceded his appearance. The algorithm spat out a sequence of anomalies. Frame lag, phase misalignment, a brief temperature drop in the lens metadata. For 4 frames, less than 1/6 of a second, the light values inverted. Only in that corner, like the image tried to delete itself. I thought about Maria Alvarez, about her sudden silence after mentioning this figure, about the way her voice had dropped when she said, "He appears to those who hear the silence." I found a photo online, buried in the comments of a 2006 Vatican architecture blog. A group of theology students posing in front of the North Gardens, smiling. Sunglasses. Summer. In the far back corner, almost lost in the hedges, The same figure, white-robed, blurred. The EXEF data on the photo had been stripped, but there was a date. July 13th, 2006. I pulled a local newspaper archive. On July 14th, 2 of those students were found drowned in the Tiber. No explanation, no drugs, no water in their lungs. The official record said sudden cardiac arrest. Both. The 3rd student, the only survivor, moved to a monastery in Belgium and was never heard from again. I tracked him down. Brother Lionel, now age 38. He agreed to a voice-only call. It lasted under 3 minutes. I asked him what happened that day. There was a long silence on the line. Then, in a shaking whisper, "He was behind us in every photo, but he didn't cast a shadow." I asked who he meant. The man who watches the silence. The one who wears white so we think he's holy. I asked why he'd left public life. He said only, "I stopped speaking because he doesn't blink." The line went dead. No answer on redial. The next morning, I checked my own photo library, the full archive I'd brought with me from New York. I hadn't looked at these shots in years. I opened one at random. A candid from a reporting trip to Jerusalem, 2017. Western Wall, daylight, pilgrims. My blood froze. In the shadow of the walkway arch, the man. White. Motionless. I hadn't noticed him before. He hadn't been there when I took the shot. I opened another, then another. In 5 photos, across different cities, continents, and years, the same figure appeared. Always in the corner, always just out of focus, always dressed in white. I hadn't been documenting him, he'd been letting me document myself. I began to feel watched in daylight. My reflection delayed again in reflective surfaces. Not in mirrors this time, in car windows and puddles, even in the shine of silverware. In every warped reflection, I looked slightly off, head tilted a degree too far. One pupil smaller than the other, mouth not quite aligned. One night, I left my phone recording as I slept, just to see what sounds I might pick up. The next morning, I reviewed the 6-hour file. At 4 hours, 17 minutes, there was a change in the room tone. No clicks, no footsteps, only a breath. It wasn't mine. Then, faintly, layered into the background noise like a whisper through cloth. The key does not seek the door. The door seeks the key. The breath returned, then stopped. The room remained silent for the rest of the night. That same morning, I received a plain envelope slid under my door. No stamp, no return name. Inside, a single Polaroid, my hotel room, shot from the foot of my bed. Empty, except for one figure, standing beside the window. Back turned, clothed in white. I entered the tunnel just past midnight. The storm above had helped, tourists gone, guards distracted. I used the maintenance access point behind the museum's old boiler shaft, exactly where Maria's annotated diagram had marked a forgotten drain line. It took 27 minutes of crawling through a space that barely fit my shoulders. The stone was older than anything I'd ever touched. Porous, warm, and breathing condensation that smelled of cinder and metal. I emerged into blackness. The chamber waited ahead. Not a crypt, not a storage cellar. It had no human intention in its design. The walls weren't laid, they were grown, or pressed into place by some geological shift engineered long before any man had named this hill. The room was oval, about 10 meters across, with a central depression in the floor. A shallow bowl lined in ancient brick and filled with gray ash. Not dust, ash. It was thick, clinging, and strangely magnetic. Small flecks rose from the pile like iron to static when I moved too close. I circled once, flashlight stuttering. My breath became visible even though the air was warm. Something in this space confused temperature, sound, even weight. My backpack suddenly felt heavier. On the far wall, I found carvings. Not chiseled, more like branded into the stone, burned deep with heat that had to have been inhuman. Symbols spiraling inwards from a central point. Many matched what I had seen in the Codex Solomoni, but others were new, or perhaps older than language. A triangle within a circle, cross-hatched with lines like a compass with no cardinal points. Another, a hollowed human figure with no head, kneeling, arms outstretched, holding nothing. Then I found it. The cloth. It hung from the wall as though untouched by time, stained with years, edges frayed but still intact. A heavy tapestry, draped not across a doorway but over a shallow alcove. I hesitated. Every instinct screamed not to touch it, but I had come too far. I raised my hand and lifted the corner. Inside was a figure, human in size, but not human in symmetry, kneeling on both knees, arms frozen in upward prayer, back unnaturally straight, as if its spine had never learned to bend. It was not a statue. It was not a corpse. Its skin was ash gray, dusted with the same material from the floor, as if it had grown out of it. Its face was undefined, no features, only an indentation where the eyes should be, filled with what looked like dried wax. Where a mouth should have been, there was a seal, not physical, not stitched, a natural closing, as though the body had chosen silence before ever knowing speech. I did not touch it. I couldn't. My limbs locked, not with fear, but with something older, recognition, and that's when I felt it. A shift behind me, subtle as a change in pressure. No sound, no footsteps, just absence. I turned. Nothing. The chamber remained still, but the ash in the bowl was rising, like dust caught in a breath that no one had taken. A wind formed from no source, spinning in place, tugging at the corners of my coat. The symbols on the wall began to glow, not with light, but with something more invasive. A pull on the eye, as though they wanted to be seen and remembered. A voice, not external, but pressing into the mind like an unwanted thought, whispered a phrase I couldn't locate in memory, but somehow already knew. There was never a tomb, only a seat. I stepped back. The wind died instantly. The chamber fell quiet again, but the kneeling figure had changed. Where there had been no eyes, two small indentations now glistened, wet. The ash bowl stopped stirring. My phone buzzed, no signal, no message, only an alert I didn't recognize. Silentium detected, file sync in progress. My screen flickered. Then, without input, a photo appeared, a fresh image, of me, in the chamber, facing the wall, arms raised, but I had never taken it, and I was holding something I couldn't see. The photo vanished. The battery died. I turned to leave. The exit tunnel had changed, narrower, slicker, as though stone had remembered it wanted to close. I dropped the recorder but kept the notes. As I crawled out, blood running from one nostril and a hollow ringing in my skull, I looked back only once. The figure was still kneeling, but its head had turned. The envelope arrived at dawn. No knock, no rustle at the door, just a sudden sense that I wasn't alone. It lay on the floor by my bed, sealed with dark wax stamped in the shape of a fish-hooked key. No address. No return mark. Inside, a black micro SD card taped to a folded napkin from a cafe I hadn't visited. The ink was smeared, but one word was legible. Run. I didn't. Instead, I loaded the card into my laptop, fully air-gapped, and watched. The file was old, degraded, as if copied too many times. Date stamped October 13th, one day before Andrea Benedetti's official disappearance. The video opened in complete darkness. Then the soft click of a lamp. A face appeared. Benedetti, sweat on his brow, shirt collar unbuttoned, hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the camera. The light flickered once. He looked thinner than in the previous footage. Eyes sunken, but not afraid. No, resigned, like a man who'd already accepted his name had been erased from every book that mattered. "This is not a confession," he began. "This is an obligation." He lifted a book into view, the same black-leathered journal I had seen in the first recording, this time covered in white ash. The silence is not the danger, it is the container, the vault. What waits beneath it is not demonic, not divine, it is pre-naming, pre-time. It isn't evil, it is unfiltered will, and it doesn't want to speak to us. It wants us to speak it. He breathed shallowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if trying to wipe out something burned into his eyes. They told me I would serve only as an observer, that the ritual required no belief, only proximity. They lied. It doesn't matter what you believe. The moment you hear it, it's already inside. He paused, looking off camera. A metallic scrape echoed faintly, like a latch shifting somewhere nearby. His voice dropped. The fifth key is not ceremonial. It's not even symbolic. It's biological. Inherited not through blood, but through vacancy. It waits for a host that can carry silence without answering it. The screen jumped. Static lines crawled across the frame. For 1 second, no more, the camera feed split. 2 images, side by side. One, Benedetti, speaking. The other, Benedetti, kneeling, mouth sealed shut with red twine, eyes waxed. When the feed stabilized, the man was back, staring directly into the lens. I have less than 12 hours, perhaps fewer. When the voice grows louder, they come. They don't wear collars. They wear white, blank, pure, and they take you somewhere the air doesn't echo. He held up a photograph. Blurry, distorted, clearly taken in motion. But even through the warping, I saw a figure, not him. Me, standing in a hallway I hadn't yet entered. Same coat, same camera bag, same posture. "If you've found this," Benedetti said, "then I was right to send it. It means the line has broken again. The key has passed. You are next." He leaned in close, whispered. "It does not come through doors. It comes through recognition. Don't speak when it speaks to you. Don't look when it mirrors you. And never, ever follow its reflection." His expression changed, subtly, something behind the eyes like resignation collapsing into relief. I am not Andrea anymore. I am only closure. Then the screen flickered, but not off. A final image appeared. Not video. A still, a cell deep underground, carved into bedrock. No furnishings, no camera, no cables. Just a single man, seated in lotus position, skin gray, eyes sealed, arms out in prayer. The figure from the chamber of ashes. But now, unmistakably, undeniably, it was Andrea Benedetti. A new wax seal had formed over his face. His body was slumped, but his spine remained rigid. At the bottom of the frame, a caption appeared in crimson font. Silence maintained. Transfer pending. The file ended. No metadata. When I tried to reopen it, the SD card shorted. Burned hot. Cracked in two. That night, I opened my email. A new message sat unread. no sender, no subject. Just a single attachment, a .txt file named Your Next Step, txt. I opened it. Coordinates, a time, a room number, and beneath it, one sentence, do not speak inside. Room 317 was exactly where the file said it would be, tucked into the back hallway of a long-abandoned guest wing in a Vatican-owned monastery on the outskirts of Rome, officially listed as undergoing structural restoration. There were no workers, no scaffolding, only silence so thick it distorted depth perception. I entered at precisely the time specified, 3:17 a.m. No one waited inside. The door locked behind me with no mechanical sound. The walls were bare, no crucifix, no bed, only a narrow stone bench and a heavy wooden panel in the floor. Dark, rectangular, dustless, a hatch slightly ajar. Inside, a stairwell, no railing, just stone steps angling downward at a sharp decline. The air turned instantly, dry, ancient, layered with something sweet and metallic, like flowers sealed in rust. I descended. There were no lights, but somehow I could see. The deeper I went, the brighter the dark became, until shadow itself seemed to generate faint illumination, like inverse flame. My footsteps no longer echoed. The walls no longer met at clean angles. I passed alcoves that bent the air, hallways that seemed thicker than they appeared, and doors that pulsed without hinges. At some depth I couldn't name, I stopped checking time. It no longer seemed to pass linearly. Then came the silence, not the absence of sound, the presence of it, active, a force. It clung to the skin, pressed into the ears. My thoughts grew louder, as if shouting inside a vacuum. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow and distant, not inside my chest, but behind my eyes. I reached a landing where the architecture changed entirely. No more stone. Now, smooth, obsidian-like panels, warm to the touch, forming walls that curved in unnatural geometries. The symbols returned here, carved not with tools, but grown, like veins of meaning running through the material. They pulsed faintly with recognition. And then I saw the door. Not a door in the traditional sense. No frame, no handle, but an archway sealed by a solid surface that shimmered like black water caught in stasis. Across it, one word burned deep into the material. Silentivm. I approached. My breath quickened. My body began to shake, not from fear, but from something deeper. Resonance. My nervous system was vibrating to match something I couldn't hear, and then I felt it. Not behind the door, behind me. No sound, no shift, but the sudden certainty of not being alone. I turned slowly, and there, in the corridor I had just passed, stood the figure. White, silent, watching. His face was blank now, not covered, not obscured, just smoothed over, like wax poured over a statue. He did not move. He did not need to. I understood. He had been here long before me. And he wasn't guarding the door. He was waiting to be replaced. I looked back to the seal. A low pulse began to build. Not in the room, but in my spine, like a tuning fork inside my marrow. It was not a sound, it was a summons. Words rose in my throat, not mine, not language, just shape. I felt the urge to speak, to respond, to say what the silence wanted. But Benedetti's words returned like a blade through fog. Don't speak when it speaks to you. Don't look when it mirrors you. Never, ever follow its reflection. I turned away from the figure and stepped toward the door. The moment I touched the surface, the pulse stopped. Everything stopped. No heartbeat, no thought, only awareness, not mine. It flooded me, Not memories, not images, intent. An intelligence vast and wordless, coiled inside the void, aware not of people, but of patterns. I wasn't being watched, I was being measured, weighed, considered. And then, the silence spoke. Not in voice, not in tone. In me. Your predecessor has been accepted. The vault requires a new listener. You have been known. Something behind the seal shifted. The black began to clear. Inside, I saw not a room, not a prison, but a mirror, and in it, not my face, but the man in white now wearing my body. He raised a hand. So did I. I turned to run. The corridor had vanished. All that remained was the door, and my own reflection smiling where I wasn't. There is no time here. That's the first thing you notice once the door closes. Not just clocks. Time as a sense, as rhythm, as sequence. Gone. You don't feel it pass. You feel exchanged by it, like a book returned to a shelf you never remember being borrowed from. I don't know how long it's been. Hours? Years? The seal accepted me. I remember that much. Not a ritual, not a coronation. Just a moment when my name disappeared. Not from memory, from reality. There is a silence inside me now. It isn't mine. It is me. The room, if it can be called that, is no longer geometric. Its walls curve in ways that contradict orientation. There are no shadows here, because there's no source of light. And yet I see, perfectly, every etching, every surface pulsing faintly with memory that isn't mine. The figure in white is gone. Because I wear the coat now, it fits perfectly. I don't remember putting it on. No voice instructs me, but the silence does. It teaches. With absence. It shows me things I cannot describe. Structures beneath structures. A vault beneath the Vatican, beneath the Basilica, beneath even language. Layers upon layers of unspoken agreements, made before theology, before even myth. I am not alone. There have been others. Each one chosen. Each one erased. I have read their names in the dust that never settles, in carvings that are rewritten each time someone forgets who they were. Benedetti, Lucian de Borghese, others whose names had no letters, only patterns. All listeners, all keys. There is no escape because the roll is not a prison. It is a seal, and seals do not open. They are placed. I am not watched here. I am known. The silence pulses now at intervals. It wants contact, but not noise. It seeks shape, emotion, patterns of will. And when I sleep, if this sensation can be called sleep, it builds images in my head, like structures made of suggestion. I dream of altars not made of stone, but of consent. Of cities designed as locking mechanisms, of language as a trapdoor. Each time I try to remember my own voice, the chamber grows colder. The walls bend in, gently, not as threat, but as reminder. I said I wouldn't speak inside, but that promise has decayed. Yesterday, or maybe 1,000 years ago, I whispered a single word into the darkness. I don't remember what it was, but the silence did. It echoed it back, and it used my voice. For a moment, I heard myself calling out from the corridor I had entered, then from the stairwell, then from the world above, as if someone else was retracing my steps, someone with my face. The door behind me flickered, not open, just remembered. I approached it, not to exit. I know that's no longer possible, but to see, and I saw. On the other side, Rome. Night. A street corner. A figure walking slowly past an old bookstore. Same backpack, same coat, same way of looking over the shoulder. He paused, looked up, directly at the camera, directly at me. The feed closed, the chamber shuddered, then stabilized. A final glyph ignited above the threshold. I could read it now. Transfer complete. It is not a curse. It is a mechanism, an obligation, passed down not through faith, but through pattern recognition. It chooses those who ask the wrong question, and rewards them with the only answer that has ever mattered. Be still. The silence hums in me now, not waiting, watching, recording, listening, for the next one to come close enough to wonder.